we have honored that commitment as we have done all of our other commitments. So what were the problems with the APNU AFC NRF Act? Let me say, I will repeat again what I said in the Parliament today, that the APNU AFC NRF Act was a very sinister and dangerous piece of legislation. Frankly speaking, I think it's one of the most alarming pieces of legislation that I've seen in a very long time, for the following reasons which we identified. First and foremost, we identified as a party at that time the fact that they were bringing this bill to Parliament after a no confidence motion was before the House. And as I pointed out today in the Parliament, the very day that we submitted, that the opposition leader, their opposition leader, now Vice President Jack Bailey, the day that he submitted the no confidence motion to Parliament, 15th of November, also remarkably coincidentally happened to be the day that they published their NRF bill in the Gazette. And they submitted that bill and read it for the first time in Parliament on the 19th of November, after the no confidence motion had already been tabled in the Parliament. So they submitted this bill to Parliament knowing that they were about to face a no confidence motion. Having submitted it on the 19th of November, they proceeded to debate it. Well, in fact, before they proceeded to debate it, the no confidence motion came up for consideration on the 21st of December. And as you know, they lost that no confidence motion. And having lost the no confidence motion, the Parliament should have been dissolved constitutionally and an election called. They did not respect that, and that history is now well documented and very well known by the general public. Instead of respecting the constitutional consequences that should flow from losing a no confidence motion, the APNU+AFC, having lost a no confidence motion on the 21st of December 2018, came back to Parliament on the 3rd of January 2019 and pushed this NRF bill through Parliament. So first of all, the bill suffers a fundamental defect, a fatal defect, in that it was passed through the Parliament after the government had been defeated by a no confidence motion. But perhaps even more worryingly, the contents of the bill reflected a number of very sinister, alarming, terrifying features. And we recognize these, and if you'd like me to, I would elaborate what some of these highly problematic features were.
Yes.
So first and foremost, and this is a point that we highlighted from the very beginning, like I said, this advocacy was led by the Vice President at the time. We made the point that the bill in that formulation placed too much power in the hands of the Minister of Finance. So there was no governance architecture, governance structure. There was no board of directors. There was an all-powerful Minister of Finance who was responsible for overall management of the fund, approval of the investment mandate that would guide, and investment policies that would guide the investment of the fund, executing the operational agreement with the central bank that will govern the operational administration of the fund, appointing key personnel like the senior investment advisor and analyst, contracting investment advisory companies, approving the appointment of the macroeconomic committee and the investment committee, determining the economically sustainable amount and the fiscally sustainable amount for the purposes of determining the amount that can be withdrawn from the fund. So essentially the Minister of Finance was involved and in a position to tamper with the amount that would be withdrawn from the fund. So the Minister was everywhere, and we made this point.
And you fast forward to now, comparing that
Correct.
specific issue, you can compare.
Excellent. So I'm glad that you've raised that point. Fast forward to now, we have removed all of those powers from the Minister of Finance. We have dramatically reduced the powers of the Minister of Finance, and we have introduced for the first time a board of directors to be responsible for the oversight and overall management of the fund. And that board of directors includes representation from the private sector and the nominee of the Parliament. So we've strengthened the governance of the fund. That's the first point. Secondly, the APNU+AFC Act included a very complicated and impossible to understand formula to determine how much money can be transferred from the fund to the budget, and deliberately so. Because this complicated formula created the room for the Minister of Finance to manipulate the amount or to determine and influence in a significant way how much will be transferred from the fund to the budget. We said from the inception, we will simplify this and make it transparent. We want every single, this money belongs to the Guyanese people. And we want every single, we don't want it to be a mystery or for the Minister of Finance alone to be, have the exclusive authority to determine and figure out how much we want to transfer. We want everybody in Ghana to be able to calculate how much we want to transfer from the fund to the budget. And we gave this commitment. And so here again, fast forwarding to today, the second critical issue that we've addressed is the simplicity and transparency of the formula to decide how much money is going to transfer from the budget, from the fund to the budget. In addition to that, we have strengthened the transparency and reporting to make sure that every single receipt into the fund is published in the Gazette and is reported to the Parliament. You would recall that the APNU+AFC received an $18 million signing bonus and attempted to siphon it off, diverted it from the consolidated fund, and met all sorts of unauthorized expenditure out of it. So we have said we want to make sure that that would never happen again. And we have, our bill addresses that. And so these are just to give you a sense of, so maybe one other point I'll make, their act provided for money's expenditure to be met from the fund without parliamentary approval. We have now said every single dollar to be spent from the fund and every single expense associated with management of the fund must be approved by Parliament first. That is a new feature that was not there before.
And there have been criticisms from the opposition and some section of society in relation to pointing out some of the flaws, and we've gotten this, the views being expressed is that, okay, other persons or some persons may believe if they're not too familiar with the legislation or the proposed bill at the time that the government will just be spending money willy-nilly and there's no proper scrutiny or no proper oversight.
Sure.
Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad that you raised it because nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, not a single dollar can move from the fund to the budget unless it is approved by Parliament in advance and through the budgetary process. So if we want an amount of allocations to move from the fund to finance the budget, we have to go to Parliament and seek approval of that and debate it as part of the budgetary process. And as long as it's part of the budgetary process, it's subject to parliamentary oversight. It's subject to parliamentary oversight ex ante or before the fact, because the Parliament scrutinizes all amounts that it approves. And it's subject to parliamentary oversight after the fact, because it's audited by the Auditor General. The Auditor General's reports go to the Public Accounts Committee. So in fact, we have actually closed the loophole, whereas in their act, they were able to meet expenditure out of the fund without parliamentary approval. We have stopped that. We have said every single dollar that comes out of the fund must be subject to prior parliamentary approval.
So there's stringent and adequate oversight.
Absolutely.
Management of the funds.
Absolutely. And in addition, the mere fact that you now have a board instead of a one-man show, which was the Minister of Finance, the mere fact that you have a 5-member board alone enhances transparency immediately.
So, Minister, what are your views? Would you explain all of this and explain in terms of the transparency that this bill will bring forth? Why do you think the opposition, as apart from just opposing,
right,
would be so aggressive in being against this bill?
Well, let me say this.
Especially when you raise the point with, not being a one-man show. One would think that that's a good
thing. First of all, they don't want us to disclose the great deception that they inflicted on the people of Guyana through this NRF Act. They don't want that, they want to pretend that they had a perfect piece of legislation in place. As a matter of fact, their NRF Act constituted a massive deception of the people of Guyana. They don't want us to disclose that. But secondly, and I believe more importantly, they have an agenda to obstruct development in this country. They have an agenda to slow down and to stop everything that is positive. It's not new. If you go back to the pre-2015 People's Progressive Party government, you would have seen that they obstructed the Amila Falls hydropower project, which was a project for which we had a major international investor willing to invest. They obstructed that project. Today, we would have had electricity supply to our national grid from Amila, but they blocked that and effectively derailed that project. And there's so many other examples that I can think of. So the APNU+AFC has an agenda that is destructive and obstructive. Their agenda is to slow down and to stop development because they don't want anything, they don't want the people of Guyana to enjoy the benefit of improved quality of life for the simple reason that they don't want that to be realized. They don't want that to be delivered on the People's Progressive Party government. So in other words, they're willing to cut off their face, their nose, to spite their face. They're willing, for the people of Guyana, including the small number of supporters that they might still have, they're willing to have the people of Guyana suffer the circumstance of delayed development purely for political purposes, purely because they don't want the People's Progressive Party to get the credit of improvement in people's lives. The resources that will be unlocked by this bill and that ultimately will flow to the budget, not only will flow to the budget in a completely transparent manner, but importantly will be used to finance development initiatives, will be used to finance infrastructure, social services, to improve quality of people's lives, to create thousands of jobs. They don't want those things to happen. So this is really about, it doesn't matter what we have put in that bill. We could have put anything in that bill. This could have been a bill, a perfect bill handed down from the heavens. The APNU+AFC's objective was to stymie and frustrate the passage of this bill so that the people of Guyana cannot receive the benefit of the development initiatives that will flow from the implementation of this bill. It was the same with the local content bill. They had 5 years in government and they didn't bring a local content bill. We brought a local content bill today. Well, not today, we submitted it previously, we debated it today. They wanted to frustrate and stymie that too.
Yes, we'll get to the local content bill. I'll bring in Minister Robeson Benn. Minister, you care to share your views on any specific part of the bill, mostly in terms of transparency. You can touch on the transparency one.
Yeah, well, we get to the transparency part. I think an important part is what Minister Ashni was relating to, the attitude into respect of development of Guyana. Both of these bills, the local content bill and the NRF, the resource fund bill, are juxtaposed together at a significant juncture of our history in terms of developing, one, the natural resources of the country through Guyanese, and particularly by emboldening and energizing local entrepreneurship, business development, and creating large, wide-scale employment and training in the country. I think together those two things, given the fact that we have the opportunity to capitalize on the discovery of oil and on the resources, these are two critical historical bills which were brought to the Parliament. Unfortunately, it does continue to appear that the APNU+AFC in Parliament think that politics is a zero-sum game and governance is a zero-sum game in the Parliament, and it has nothing to do with the real lives and the development of the country and people. So this is particularly disturbing again, but expected anyway, given the history of them in Parliament, the skirmishing, the scuffling, whatever you would say over the years. Given the fact too that we have had the experience of the no opposition in government between 2015 through the no confidence motion and through the recount and all of those issues, at every step of the way they have attempted to frustrate development in the country. People are elected to parliament to be able to promote, debate, discuss, create opportunities, even with the debate that is going on, the future and the pathways to the future for the development, for improvement for this generation and for the next going forward. But we expect and we understand, and we've had the experience again, that they are not ready for the positions they hold in the parliament as legislators, as people who are perceived somehow to have a constituency. They have had people who have voted for them, and a large number of people given the last elections and the troubles we had then. One might argue that a lot of people worked and voted for them out of fear and apprehensions going forward at that time. But they have to now, I think, a great fear and anxiety that they may never come back into governance leadership, into the government itself going forward because of their severe missteps over the years. I think the last president was an absentee leader. I think that there was a laissez-faire approach to governance and to the managing of the economy. People did all kinds of things which are considered now, of course, and we have the situation of Minister Ashni Singh's predecessor in government. I think he was just a $3 million bail. In relation to their responsibilities in government and the questions of transparency and accountability. And so we intend again to bring the country out of that crisis which was created. We intend to make sure and to make up for the last 5 or more years when they were in government and nothing happened. They smashed sugar. They practically destroyed the bauxite on the Robeson River. It was mentioned the energy effort we made in terms of renewable power, the Myla Hydro Power Project, a signal project for the country to reduce the cost of power and to make available sustainable power for industry and for development. They stopped that. They severely impacted the timber and the rice and all other aspects of our country and the lives of people. Thousands of people lost jobs and families were badly affected. So somehow, even with all of their internal issues, I think at the back of their minds, they want relevance, and their only relevance they can see themselves getting is by acting up again, beyond their inability, their natural inability to govern in any event. And as I said, that the only way they see politics and the development of people and their function as legislators, that they think they're in a zero-sum game.
Yes, Minister Benn, since you're speaking on the opposition, do you think with the incidents that took place in Parliament today that the opposition missed an opportunity to actually represent the Guyanese people?
This is exactly the problem. I think this is exactly the problem. They had an opportunity, even when they supposedly have a leadership change in their party or parties in their groupings, that they could have showed the country, the people, the parliament, the investors, the business community, a different approach to the government's model in Guyana, an approach to their view and vision for the future. Unfortunately, we go back to the 2015, 2019, 2020 period where they don't see themselves really skilled enough, perhaps. They think it's perhaps a schoolyard or something, not sure sometimes. They think it's something for catcalling. And the serious business of government, of development, which we are committed to as legislators, they don't have a proper appreciation for it. They don't care about it. They don't understand it. It's beyond their ken. And it's serious for the country. And its impacts are great. It works in many ways for our benefit. It's much ways, but that's not what we want. We want to have an engaging debate. We want to knock off on each other ideas and to cross-fertilize each other, to have spirited debate, and to work to develop the country in an atmosphere that is conducive and sustainable, to get the best out of each other in debate and discussion, and an understanding of the future pathways, as I said, how we would want to develop. But the experience today again shows the type of people, the type of organization we have to face ourselves with, to face off against. It shows that we have to work harder to have people have an understanding of the major and critical issues for the development of the country, and to have people better understand what we need to do to protect ourselves against, so that we could assure a future with a vision, with development, with sustainability for our country in critical times. We found the oil. The Natural Resources Fund now relates mostly to petroleum issues, oil and gas. There are other resources which may come into play as we go forward in gold and other natural resource issues. There may be benefits coming out of that, and as our skill sets in manufacturing and development and service providing develops. So we have to be better prepared. But we cannot have this type of distraction and confusion and ways of fuffling the truth, to use a local word, in respect of how our country will develop.
And what message is this sending to the international community as well, investors versus who are interested?
I think that they would. I think that this event tonight would scare those persons who would want to come to develop the country. They would be pretty upset. I think anybody, ordinary people that I've seen on messages already on the phone, are pretty upset, of all kinds, of all races, are pretty much upset. People think that we've demeaned ourselves. I think in any event, we have a duty as parliamentarians to work with them too, to bring the discourse, the engagement back to a level of some civility and respectability, but particularly too in respect of the importance and the respect for the making of laws, the respect for the parliamentary and democratic procedures that are on our Constitution, and for the framework in which we have to develop the country.
Yes, Minister, you're responsible for security as well, and we saw a disturbing video, live actually, all Guyanese, of the removal of the Mason Parliament.
Grossly.
What implications does that have for us?
Well, here it is, they're talking about they don't want some teeth-in bill to pass, but the first thing they do is to try to steal the mace, the symbol of the parliament, to stop any passage of any bill. They don't want to sit down to discuss the issue in a way which would enhance the sovereignty of parliament and the quantum, the quantity and respectability for democracy. They don't want that. So they figure that they think we're out by someplace in a yard fighting over the mace and doing things like that. Of course we didn't join in. We had to protect the minister so that he could make his presentation and to take steps along with the speaker to make sure that things didn't degenerate to a point where the bill could not have been passed. But the level to which we've fallen today is highly regrettable, but I think this is what we have to expect. I think that business people and our international partners and investors would want to know, would understand now who they want to engage with in respect of partnering with Guyana, with the government in terms of our development. The Natural Resource Fund bill, now the act, it's nothing new. It follows international best practices. It has, compared to what was there before, it goes to extraordinary lengths to protect in terms of accountability and all of those things to make sure that there's sufficient scrutiny with respect to how it is handled. It takes away the power from the minister. It has several steps and ways before and during and after in which there's great scrutiny of the bill and how best we could account for the way the monies are spent. It has to go to parliamentary approval and parliamentary scrutiny. So the reaction to it, of course, is disgraceful. There was a suggestion that it didn't have what Santiago principles or something. There was a big ban outside in the road. They had that there was no Santiago principles. It's in the bill. They obviously didn't read the bill.
That's correct.
The Santiago guidelines and all the other things which are related to making sure there's transparency in the use of what is in effect a sovereign wealth fund dealings. We have had the opportunity to learn from the Ghanaians who are here in discussions. We are aware of what the Nigerians are doing, the Gabonese are doing, the South Africans and others are doing in respect of these issues. We know the missteps which were made in Angola with issues there in respect of their things. So it's ridiculous and brings us to a new low in terms of their behavior in the parliament. They brought themselves to a new low. But we could hold our heads high in respect of how we have responded to them and how we've fulfilled our duty and responsibility for the people in Guyana. I know growing up, if I may digress a bit, my parents would say, where's the Klondike in Guyana? Could they go? Why don't we have oil in Guyana? Venezuela got oil, Trinidad got oil, Suriname got oil, they did leak across and we have it here. And that used to wear me. I became a geologist and I think we've succeeded in achieving in a large measure answering those issues. So the important thing is how do we now move forward to use the funds which we will garner to develop the country. For each and every person, our president has said so, our vice president has said so, our prime minister has said so, our finance minister has gone to extreme lengths to say all of these things and to read and to point out in great detail what it means, how it could be done. We've had consultations which they don't want to think or hear about. They have a few acolytes who come forward and say this isn't done and that isn't done, and perhaps it's selling newspapers. But it has no meaning if you read the documentation. So it's sad, but we have to move forward. We can't wait on them. We keep talking, we try to do a bit of hugging, and somehow we might still love them, but they're not doing the best for our country.
Yes, and probably you can speak to, as you mentioned, the consultation, because there seems to be a lot of talk about that. I guess Minister Dr. Singh, you can speak to that, the amount of consultation that took place on both the Natural Resource Fund bill and the local content bills. Persons can understand.
Sure, certainly. Well, let me say first of all that in the case of the local content bill, we had tremendous consultation because we needed to get inputs from both the oil industry, because they're affected by the local content bill, because they're the people who are going to be buying the inputs from local companies. And we got tremendous feedback also from the local private sector, the domestic or indigenous private sector in Guyana, to get a sense of their capacity. In some cases, some of them made representations that they're able to achieve 100% level of local content. We had conversations with them about that. In many cases, the percentages were adjusted through the successive rounds. The Vice President himself led a major consultative activity at the Pegasus Hotel. I had the privilege of joining him there. And that was only one of a series of successive rounds of consultation. After last night, we were working with different stakeholder groups to try to, accommodate their representations. Up to last night, you will see in fact that we moved amendments both with the accounting profession and the insurance industry. Those were the result of consultations that we were having last night. In the case of the Natural Resources Fund bill, we had the ultimate consultation of this bill. We had the consultation with the people there. Because in the run-up to the elections, we identified publicly what our concerns were with the bill. And we articulated what were the changes that we were going to make to the bill once we get into government. In fact, this was a commitment that we gave, that we're going to reduce the ministerial powers. We said publicly we will reduce the ministerial powers, we will require publication of all receipts into the fund, publication in the Gazette and in Parliament. We will introduce a penalty or increase the penalty on the minister if he fails to publish and publicly report receipts into the fund, trying to ensure that we never have a repeat of that vulgar incident where they siphoned off that $18 million. So our intentions with respect to reforms of the NRF architecture were signaled in the run-up to the elections, were conveyed to the people there, and as you know, our manifesto and the other commitments that we gave were subject to tremendous debate and scrutiny in the run-up to the elections. And then, of course, as you know, we were democratically elected. They wanted to steal that too.
Yes, I know we spoke a lot about the Natural Resource Fund bill, but if you can just touch briefly on the local content bill, just from the aspect of how Guyanese will benefit, and also in the same breath we can see how, exactly you can speak to how that will be balance of not shutting out overseas or foreign investors as well. So how that's balanced.
Absolutely. It's important that your viewers understand what the local content bill does. The local content bill basically says to oil companies and their contractors that they now have a legal obligation. It is now compulsory for them to buy a minimum level of their inputs in 40 different sectors. A minimum percentage of their inputs must be bought from Guyanese nationals and Guyanese companies. So accounting services, 90% of their inputs, 90% of the accounting services that they buy must be bought from Guyanese companies or Guyanese nationals. Insurance services, local insurance services, 100% of their local insurance services must be bought from Guyanese companies or Guyanese nationals. So by legislating, by requiring by law that oil companies and their contractors buy a minimum percentage from Guyanese companies and Guyanese nationals, we are creating immediately an opportunity, a business opportunity for Guyanese companies and Guyanese nationals, a business opportunity and an employment opportunity. And in addition to that, we are enhancing the transparency with which the sector is managed, because now, as a result of this local content legislation, oil companies and their contractors are required to follow open, competitive procurement processes. And those procurement opportunities have to be communicated to the Guyanese audience. So Guyanese companies have an opportunity to participate. We've introduced a local content register, or two registers rather, one for the purposes of employment and one for the purposes of procurement transactions. So any company or individual who meets the requirements, the definition of a local company, a Guyanese company or a Guyanese national can register. You're encouraged, you can and you're encouraged to register, which means that you're now eligible, having met the requirements and put your name on the register, you're now eligible. You now enjoy the situation where your business is counted as local content to the oil companies and their contractors. We now require the procurement plans and the local content plans of the oil companies to be prepared and to be published. And so all of those aspects, one, enhance transparency in the oil and gas sector, particularly as it relates to employment and procurement opportunities. And in turn, for the indigenous or non-oil local Guyanese economy, you now have a large pool of business opportunities that Guyanese investors, whether existing or potential, can position themselves to take advantage of. So it's going to result in immediate business opportunities and employment opportunities. It's going to result in ramped up investment because people are going to recognize that they have a potential market here that they can invest and increase and grow their business. And that in turn is going to lead to job creation, generation of incomes, improved lives, and so on.
Okay, I know that in other countries, right, persons, when it comes to investment, and with the rules in terms of indigenous, and we would say indigenous, well, for their countries, respective countries, the persons who are in business, we have cases where some foreign persons would come in with interest to invest, and then they might own, let's say, the Guyanese person in this instance, let's say they have 70%, I'm just calling that percentage, and because they're partnering, right? And somebody has the 30%. But it's more of a, what you call fronting, but that foreign company is really who's benefiting more. The Guyanese is just fronting. Is that something that can be addressed?
I'm glad that you asked that question. Clearly you have studied this the bill yourself. It's a very important question. And we actually make fronting an offense in the bill. Now, fronting, misrepresenting that you are a Guyanese company providing this goods or service, when in fact you are merely a conduit through which a foreign company is doing the business. We've made that an offense now, a punishable offense in the law. Because we want the law to benefit Guyanese people and Guyanese companies. Having said that, we have introduced a very tight definition of what constitutes a Guyanese company. There's a requirement not only with shareholders, the percentage, more than 51% have to be Guyanese shareholders. We've introduced, in addition to that, you also have to have a minimum percentage of your management as Guyanese, and you have to have a minimum percentage of your employees as Guyanese nationals. And so we've put provisions in there to make sure that Guyanese companies and Guyanese people get the benefit of the framework.
And what about enforcement?
Well, we're setting up an administrative. We recognize there's going to be need for an administrative capacity to implement the act and to enforce it. So the act speaks about a local content secretariat, which is being established at the Ministry of Natural Resources. That secretariat has specified functions under the law, and we are already in the process of building the capacity to perform those functions. In fact, I should mention also that part of the local content regime requires oil companies to also have what's called a local capacity development plan, which means a plan to help develop local or indigenous capacity, to help Guyanese businesses get up to the point where they're able to take advantage of local content opportunities.
Okay, well, speaking to both bill, we've heard it more than once, actually from the Vice President himself, Dr. Barajagdio, that these two legislation, they are for the drivers of development of the oil and gas sector. Can you speak to this just in layman terms?
Sure. Well, I would say this. These two pieces of legislation not only will help to drive development of the oil and gas sector, but in fact will help to promote development across the entire economy. Because local content is about oil companies buying goods and services from Guyanese people. So the Guyanese landlord who has a property that potentially they could rent to an oil company, they will benefit from local content. The Guyanese business that engages in welding, they will benefit from local content because now the oil companies are obliged to buy a minimum percentage of their inputs from Guyanese welding companies. The Guyanese law firms, the Guyanese accounting firms, the Guyanese medical service providers like doctors, they will all benefit. Because for each one of the advertising companies and marketing companies, because for each one of those categories, there's a minimum percentage that the oil companies must buy from a Guyanese company or Guyanese national. So that the local content legislation will automatically, inevitably, unavoidably result in broad-based development of the non-oil economy and broad-based increases in opportunities for people to get employment, get jobs, do business with oil companies and their contractors. And on the NRF bill, now act, that is going to see, for the first time, we're going to be able to utilize some of our oil revenue, striking an appropriate balance between consuming, not consuming, but striking an appropriate balance between utilizing some of the resources to deliver development to the current generation of population, but also saving some for future generations. So what this bill does is it strikes the right balance between ensuring that you're able to put resources to meet the development needs of the current generation of Guyanese. Because you can't have an arrangement whereby you're simply saving for future generations when current generations are in need. You know, there's an old saying, I think a few people used it in the parliament, you can't have the grass growing while the horse is starving. I think quite a few people use that term in the parliament. And so what this bill does is it strikes that balance. It strikes a balance between ensuring that as the oil revenues increase that we're saving for the future, but at the same time that we have a minimum level of flow from the fund to the budget to finance accelerated development in Guyana.
Yeah, well, I think primarily the fact that the local content measures will allow for capital to flow to businesses. They will have opportunity to expand their businesses, to modernize their business, to participate, to bring in new technology and expertise and better understanding, enhanced skills training for workers. So I think that will drive our industry, our businesses along a pathway of tremendous growth. And this is what we need now. If there's capital coming into the country, money will be earned from taxes, the synergistic effects, the facts that we need to improve sugar and rice and all those other things to make them more mechanistic, developed. It's very critical at this moment. So the local content in itself will bring capital into the economy, into business, into the lives of people. And we need to remind ourselves that in the manifesto we talked about 50,000 jobs, and we had a big fallout in sugar on the coast, and the other knock-on effects in the communities and business, and not good issues in relation to rice. So we had a big, more than a hiatus where nothing was done. We should have been practically dealing with these issues 5 or more years ago.
Absolutely.
So it's a tragedy that we're actually dealing with these issues in the way we're dealing with them now, when they should have been dealt with a long time ago, when nothing was done. Everything was just left to go begging. And people there in government were not sure doing what, but nothing in terms of what should have been done naturally as the petroleum industry developed and as we had issues in the wide economy and in the energy sector itself for domestic consumption, business consumption.
Yes, there have been so many conversations on both bills in the past coming weeks.
Yeah.
Do you think Guyanese, especially the ordinary Guyanese, understand the wave of opportunities ahead?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I have infinite faith in the comprehension abilities of my Guyanese brothers and sisters. I believe people know that this is a unique moment in our country's economic history.
Yeah.
I believe that the average Guyanese person, man, woman, child, knows that the aspirations of many generations before us are more likely to be realized in the current generation than at any other point in time in our history. things that our grandparents and great-grandparents and our foreparents could only have dreamt of. The current generation has the greatest possible likelihood of seeing those things realized, seeing prosperity for our country and well-being for all of our people. That is no longer a pipe dream. It's no longer a distant fantasy. It's now, in fact, a reachable and realizable reality. And I think Guyanese people know this. I think, in fact, that is partly why, largely in my opinion, why the Guyanese people gave the People's Progressive Party a vote of confidence in 2020. Because having now had the benefit of being able to line up the two main parties side by side, the persons of voting age in Guyana now can quite easily remember the quality of stewardship that the People's Progressive Party provided to government and our approach to governance during the period to 2015. They could look at that on the one hand, and on the other hand, the quality of stewardship and governance delivered by the APNU+AFC from 2015 to 2020. So people were now, for the first time, if you look at Guyana's political history, you had 28 years of the PNC. Then we were in government for 23 years after the dictatorship was finally dismantled in '92. But a lot of people had forgotten what it was like to live under a PNC Guyana. And so from 2015 to 2020, many of those who had forgotten what the PNC was like got a useful and valuable reminder of what the PNC is like and what living in a PNC governed Guyana would look like and feel like. And so in 2020, what happened was people were able to line up those two experiences. One of them was no longer a distant experience.
Yeah.
People were able to line up those two experiences and make a conscious choice that having lined up these two experiences, bearing in mind where our country is economically, bearing in mind the fact that we're on the verge now of realizing prosperity for the country, and those resources need to be managed in a careful and responsible way to ensure that the long-term future, like I said, this generation, future generations, the long-term futures, their long-term futures are secure. The people of Guyana spoke in a very clear and resounding manner on the 2nd of March 2020. And finally, if I might, before Minister Benn comes in, the behavior of the PNC has not changed one bit.
No.
It hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed.
Their behavior in government prior to 1992 resembles perfectly their behavior from 2015 to 2020. Right down to their dictatorial behavior, their refusal to respect democracy, their proclivity to rig and steal elections, right down to that denominator. But also many other aspects of their behavior, including, for example, their thuggish, their disgraceful, thuggish behavior in the parliament today. That's also a manifestation of business as usual for the PNC.
It's in their DNA. It's in DNA, and I don't know how you get it out of them. Might take a few generations of new leaders coming in. I don't think not of the type that we've seen recently coming into the committee before as a result of their internal elections. But certainly, as was said, we ourselves cannot change their culture. We can hopefully provide the best examples for the young people amongst them. And certainly those young people, the Guyanese young people as a whole, I think, are now much more aware of what is happening. And in fact, if we continued in the situation which we were from 2015 to 2020, our young people would have outgrown Guyana and our political culture, because they would have given up on it and would have wanted to be elsewhere. So I think they're fully aware, they're exasperated with us. We have to, and I'm sure that they understand enough, and we have to measure up and to do better in respect of making opportunities for young people, getting the training and the expertise and the experiences that they need to take the future forward for us, for them. And I'm sure that they are aware, even if some may not say directly, that they see the PPPC as the better set of persons who could take Guyana forward, who can take us forward into the future in a sustainable, realizable way, for a much better future for the next generation.
Okay, I think we can end on that note. And thank you, Minister Singh and Minister Benn, for joining me this evening. And thank you, viewers, for joining us as well. Good night.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much for this service to your viewers. Thank you very much.
Bire mazak wuro nogong moro wia kok manoro tijik ningai.
We are one Guyana, a place of peace, a place of love. We are one Guyana, it's paradise, it's our world. A place of love. We are one Guyana, it's paradise, it's our world.
Yeah, some are we born on the hills, some on the low coastal plains. Plenty rice and sugar cane, same Guyanese blood in our vein. So make we burn out the hatred, time for erasing. Can't make that destroy. 6 races share the same space in this 83,000 square miles.
We are one Guyana, a place of peace, a place of love. We are one Guyana, it's paradise, it's our world.
Brother is a brother, no matter which religion is you. Could a Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, Hindu. Sister is a sister, real and true. One big part of culture brew.
And all of we together could really make this dream come true of a